In the previous video segment, we asked you to think about the myths and oversimplifications that are sometimes used by systems and by people working within the systems to justify this cyclic phenomenon, to live with what is so obviously not effective and not acceptable. You might have come up with some of these. The problem is worse than ever and has become unmanageable. There's not enough money or funding to deal with the issue. There are some people who simply don't want help. There are some people who simply can't be helped. There's no one who is willing or able to manage it. Or you might have a variation on this, which is that government hasn't accepted responsibility, or nobody within a particular government or system has accepted responsibility. And a variation on that, it's not my job. Let's take a look at each of these myths and oversimplifications and see whether or not they have truth to them or whether or not they're questionable. First one is the scope of the problem. I think we often have romanticized the past and believe that somehow or other there is more homelessness now, more obvious untreated mental illness now than there ever was. When in reality, it's probable that we really simply did a better job of hiding away mental health needs back in the olden days. Whether it was the hobo or the person that was romanticized as traveling the rails and was probably an undiagnosed individual with a mental health need, or whether it was the person who was locked away in a sanatorium or an institution away from the public's perspective, either way, there were a lot of people who were out there with mental health needs not getting the health care or psychosocial services that they needed. So a closer examination of our past shows that we often tended to look away from or even purposely reject people from our communities who were having mental health issues. For example, there were vagrancy laws that would have a person put into a drunk tank or a jail or moved out of a community simply for being without an income or without money and laying on a park bench someplace. Or there were people who were locked away in institutions and simply could not be in the community because they were legally allowed to be locked up. People often report that there's not enough money in the system. Well, the truth of the matter is that the system is better funded than it ever was. Now, we're talking about the number of dollars, not necessarily the percentage of dollars, and I think we can certainly argue that the system does require better funding. But I think it's equally true to say that even with more funding, if we didn't do some of the things that were being advocated in this course, we would still see a significant number of people who were falling through the cracks and not being supported. The costs will almost always exceed the funding in any government service. And without spending a lot of time on this, there's a reason for this. Part of the reason is that government is representing the taxpayer as well as the service recipient. And it's a constant struggle to try and maintain a balance there. Governments, for example, are loath to carry surpluses. And I'm not just talking about budget surpluses, but also surpluses of service. For example, we may hear about classrooms being closed down because there simply isn't enough in the way of a student population in a given community. And this can be very difficult for us as a community to grapple with. But at the end of the day, government has to try and maintain the most efficient and effective use of our services, and it's very likely that they're going to more often err on the side of being cost effective rather than being cost lucrative, having more money there than we possibly may need. We need to remember that it has always been true that our social capital matters more than our economic capital. When we look at the phenomena that have been remarkable in social history, whether it's succeeding in war, whether it's technological advances, whether it's artworks, or any number of other examples of greatness on a human scale, they have not normally come as a product of government resources being provided. They normally are caused by an individual and community commitment or will to make things happen. And that's the same thing here. We cannot stand on the crutch of waiting for the government to take care of this. And we must also remember something else. The government is us, and it does our bidding, sometimes slowly, and sometimes it can be difficult to make government move. But if we really do feel that this needs more funding, we have at the root the ability to change that by making issues around psychosocial program funding more prominent in politically sensitive times, such as elections or all candidates meetings, town meetings, that sort of thing. We need to have less dependence on formal supports, or at very least, we need to have a balance in our dependence. We need to have people having professional services, but also getting supports from within their community. The argument where the person doesn't want help is an interesting one. Mental illness doesn't make a person less discriminating about their care. And what I mean by that statement is just because a person has a mental health need doesn't mean that they're willing to sacrifice the overall quality of their life or the overall quality of the care that they will receive just to get some kind of help. So if a person goes into a facility and finds that it is wanting in some way, and for example, it may not be a very dignified facility as we've talked about earlier, or it may be very distal from their family, their jobs, or other major assets in their lives, then they may not take advantage of that service. And I have met people who have literally chosen to live under a bridge rather than sacrifice what they perceived as their dignity or their ability to make choices in their life. This isn't always a healthy thing, and it isn't always about a person being ready to get the care that they need. But people ultimately are willing to take help or care if it is done in a way that is identified or adapted to meet their needs, and if it's done in a way that is respectful and considerate of their dignity. We have to ask ourselves, is the right help available for a particular individual? And we spoke about this in the last segment. There are people who choose to live, for example, in remote communities and who need services that are very unlikely to be reserved in those small communities because they simply need a critical mass of people to make them financially viable. So sometimes people have to decide between moving to another place and changing everything about their life to get services. And so sometimes people don't want help because they don't want to lose some of the other informal or valuable social help that they're already getting. So sometimes the right help simply isn't available. And sometimes, and we haven't identified this in the slide, it's about a person being ready to take help. And we're going to talk about stages of change in a later module. And it's important for us to understand that sometimes the best help we can make for people is simply by connecting with them, being in strong, non-judgmental relationships so that when they are ready to want more advanced types of help, we can be there to help connect them to it. One of the myths is that people can't be helped. Well, we got to remember that it's true that some people do have complex needs that are probably not going to be completely solved, certainly not in the short term. And this is particularly true of people who have some of these strong overlying conditions we talked about earlier, personality disorders, intellectual disabilities, or very complex concurrent disorders, drug abuse and mental health needs combined. But we have to remember that, again, our job is to help people work towards an improved overall mental health and overall health in general, and an improved quality of life. And this isn't the same as suggesting that a person is going to be cured. We want to help a person to be better tomorrow than they were yesterday. So we have to accept alternative definitions of wellness. We cannot only go by the barometer that we consider to be the most important. An example of this is a person using methadone. For me, the idea of going to a methadone clinic and taking an opioid every day is a very, very unsavory idea. But I have never lived on the streets as a victim of heroin addiction. And so to me, while that seems something I'm loath to do, to somebody else it might represent a very significant step forward in their quality of life. The idea that it's nobody's job is perhaps one of the most troubling of all of the myths, and I hear it all the time. But at our roots, I think we have almost no chance of changing things in our community if we don't change this myth. It is all of our jobs to contribute to our community. It is all of our jobs to make this place a better place for every single one of us. If we go home every night and lock our doors and watch our televisions and get up the next morning, simply get in our car and go and produce widgets, we're not contributing to a community. And I call this the drawbridge syndrome. And it's no more prominent than it is in a suburban community such as Mission. Many people here get up early in the morning, get in their car and drive for an hour or 90 minutes into a town where they do all of their productive business. They work in a bank or a factory or a shop. They get back in their car and they come home tired, and they have earned their living, but many of them will have spent the income that they've made on their way home in some other community. When they get home, They roll up their garage door much the same way as a castle rolls down its drawbridge. Into the garage they go, and as they throw down their door, it might as well be the same as the drawbridge being drawn back up. Nobody will pass in or out of this castle until the very next day. And the person has no connection to their community. They're not out there volunteering. They're not even out there doing commerce. They're not out there bringing their children to events. And this is something that is a very damaging phenomena to the idea of community. Community is not the same thing as saying that we live in a town or a city. Community is really about the social connections that we have with each other. It's talking over the back fence. It's having a block party. It's participating in your school's pack or whatever other way you are informally connected with your neighbors. These are vital connections in terms of us being able to enjoy our community, but also in terms of us maintaining our own psychosocial health and helping others to have healthy mental health as well. We need to apply the golden rule. We need to think about what it is that we would have done for us. So if we were on the street with our car broken down or our purse had been stolen, we would hope others would reach out to us. We need to be able to do the same thing for others in their times of need. Now, I'm not suggesting we should do this recklessly. I'm not suggesting we should do this without any type of strategy or without being concerned about maintaining our own welfare. We have to think about what we can give, what's safe, what's affordable, what's comfortable for us. But if we're constantly worried that other people are going to do that, then we need to realize nobody's stepping forward to contribute in that milieu. We have to make sure that we're at least contributing something that we can give. If we're judging other people, we need to remember that never in the history of humankind has judgment helped another person. When we judge other people, it's normally nothing more than a way for us to cope with a stressful phenomenon. When we really step back and look at that judgment, it's often inaccurate, and it's often quite poisonous for us. We walk around feeling uncomfortable in our own community. And I try to live by a philosophy of the world is my living room. I think this way. If somebody came into my living room that I wasn't comfortable with, it would really soil for me the enjoyment of my home. And I think of my home as going well beyond my front door. It's my community, it's my province, it's my country, it's even the world. And so when I encounter somebody who is different or foreign to me, rather than staying completely away, I try to learn more and make a connection so that I am as comfortable with that person or that group of people as I possibly can be. And this philosophy has served me very, very well because I'm constantly learning more about the world. I'm constantly finding out new things that I can enjoy, and my life is richer because of all of those connections. So rather than judge, I hope that we will stop and learn, stop and try and make a connection, because judgment alienates for us. It creates a burden that we carry around. Remember that we're not asking you to be the only person that tries to address this issue, but instead we want everybody to do their little bit. And we all know the expression that many hands make light work. So we have to work as a team. So it's truly all of our jobs, not just you as an individual. We all have something different to contribute. And sometimes the things that we contribute are subtle and they don't have an influence until sometime downstream. For example, the way we raise our children is of huge value. How are we talking about mental health in our families? What are we doing to reverse the effects of stigma? What are we doing to provide our children with the resources and assets that they need so that they have strong and good mental health as they grow up? These kinds of things, while they may not mean an impact in the immediate future, will have a very big payoff for us downstream. In your journal, answer the following. What works? In other words, what do you think it takes to help a person who is going through the system repeatedly without making progress? Think about what you might connect up with and give to somebody that you know. It could be somebody you encounter professionally or personally. And if you're struggling with this question, here's a hint for you. When you struggled in your own life with anything, school, bad relationships, financial situations, housing, What has made the difference for you? Or who has made the difference for you? Stop and think about this if you can. This is not an easy question, and it's quite different in some ways from many of the other questions you've been asked in your journals. It asks you really to kind of dig deep, and we hope that you'll take the time to do that, even if it's not going to be a really quick journal entry here. It's not so much that the journal entry itself should take a long time, but we hope that you will truly pause and think about what you can do so that you're contributing in the lives of somebody that you know personally or professionally, and thinking about how you might be able to give of yourself so that that individual is going to make progress.